So, John Robert, I actually talked about you before. I don't know if you heard all that, but just by way of your background, I understand you were elected 4 times as mayor of Meridian, Mississippi, and served as the president and CEO of Reconnecting America. What was been really a hallmark of your work, though, is how you took a small town in a red state and you went to Congress and you talked to your senators and representatives about the importance to rail to your community and to connecting your community and you have stayed with that program with Reconnecting America. So your perspective on this remarkable time that we're experiencing with BIL funding for railroad infrastructure that we've talked about, as well as the opportunity with major new funding for Amtrak to restore service and have a truly robust rail network throughout our country, is really important. So I'm really looking forward to how you did it, kind of your analysis, how you work in this relatively polarized Congress, how you work members of Congress from the R's and the D side together to support their communities that they represent. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, good morning. And yes, I did join early and I heard those very kind things you had to say. I do appreciate it. I only wish my grandchildren had been able to hear that. They often wonder what I do exactly. It's good to be with you. I'm sorry that my work prevents me from being with you in person in Spokane, but it's a pleasure to join you this morning. When we think about economic development, for decades, economic development was based on having a large tract of property, highway access, and a little water to it. Now you've got an economic development site. But that model doesn't work as well as it once did, and it's rapidly changing. You see, today the job creators are looking to locate where the bright young workforce of the future wants to be. And that bright young workforce wants to be in a place that's walkable and bikeable and resilient. And they also want to locate in a place that is connected to the larger regions. So what we're finding in large and small cities all across the country is that if you are prepared and if you have a sense of self in your city center, and if you're connected to that larger region, then you have the opportunity for success. Next slide. So the main driving factor for economic development today is the creation of a sense of place. And that's a ferocious competition we're in. Your downtown has to be living and vibrant and offer access during the day and evening to entertainment and to quality foods and attractions that speak to the authenticity of your place. But it also has to be connected to a larger region and preferably not just by the automobile. Next slide. So as we think about what can I, as a mayor or a council member or a business person in a particular place, what asset can I have that helps me pop up on the radar screen of those creating jobs? One of those, if you're blessed to be on passenger rail or you're seeking to be on passenger rail, that station in your downtown is like that interchange on the interstate highway. Commerce is attracted there because it's an attractant for people moving in and out of your community. I'm looking at Kirkwood, Missouri. Here on the screen, you see they took their station in the downtown. They don't have a station attendant there, a ticket agent. So they man it themselves as volunteers, and it has turned not only into a welcoming front door for their passenger rail travelers, but it has also turned into a central point of activity for the people who live in Kirkwood. Next slide. You also see it in much larger cities like Denver. And my first trip to Denver was at Amtrak's request because there were members of the Denver City Council that wanted to demolish Union Station and build something new and more accessible to modes of transportation than they believed Union Station could be. Thank goodness they didn't demolish this wonderful structure. And now, if you've been to Denver, you almost can't imagine downtown Denver missing Union Station and the connection of passenger rail and transit and walkable, bikeable all into one place. Next slide. But you can also look at Normal, Illinois. Normal did not exist as a city or town with a city center. They were simply the location of the, quote, normal college where teachers were trained. But of course, you put students and faculty there, a city will evolve around it. And so it did. And Mayor Chris Coos of Normal used his downtown area at the what would be his passenger rail station. Passenger rail station is also a transit center and his city hall. So it brought life back to that one central area. Next slide. But of course, I want to talk about my hometown, Meridian, Mississippi, located on the Mississippi-Alabama border. And this is what our Union Station, Grand Union Station, looked like when it was a much newer structure and was a focal point of the downtown, 27 passenger trains a day moving in and out of Meridian. Next slide. That's who we were, but this is who we became. And this is what that station looked like, or the remnants, when I was first elected to office. You might say, well, that doesn't tell me much about Meridian, but I think it tells you a great deal. It tells you we had turned our back on our transportation connectivity. We had turned our back on the wonderful turn of the century architecture that we had been bequeathed by our forebears. Worst of all, we turned our back on our future. Next slide. So next. So the most important thing I think a mayor can do is bring a vision to the community, give them something to aspire to be. Next. And this was the vision of what I hoped we would build in downtown Meridian, playing again to our transportation connectivity, but using that to bring life back into a dead downtown. Property taxes were down. Retail sales were down. We were hemorrhaging businesses in the downtown. That had to be turned around because that downtown defined us. Next slide. And so this is what we designed and built. It was the South's first multimodal transportation center. And halfway through building this facility, Amtrak called and said, we're cutting service south of Atlanta. Well, there went one of my most prominent modes of transportation connectivity. So I organized the mayors from New Orleans to Atlanta, and we came to Capitol Hill to see what could be done to reverse this decision. Well, after our visits, Trent Lott, very conservative Republican senator from Mississippi, who was not majority leader at the time, but he called Tom Downs, who was president of Amtrak, and he told him, Tom, I didn't know I cared about Amtrak, but apparently I do. What do I need to do to change this? And Trent Lott, conservative Republican from Mississippi, and Frank Lautenberg, liberal Democrat from New Jersey, teamed together to save passenger rail in this country. It looked different in New Jersey than it did in Mississippi. The service was vastly different. But the unifying factor was the people in those two states depended on that service, needed that service. And it's the local voice that changes votes on Capitol Hill. Next slide. So what do you get for that kind of investment? Next slide. And just another one and another one. What you see is, and the city had about 1.3 million in that structure you just saw. It's about an $8 million structure. It has leveraged $197 million of additional investment within 3 blocks of this facility, of this multimodal center, and bringing life and vibrancy and business and retail sales dollars back into the downtown, and property values quadruple. Next slide. One of the signature developments is the Riley Performing Arts Center. It was built and then given to Mississippi State University. It's a literally state of the art. I know we overuse that expression, but this is true in this case. Conferencing center, but also a restored 1889 Grand Opera House. Next slide. And you see the interior of that opera house. Next slide. And the performances that come to that opera house come from the Kennedy Center here in Washington, D.C. to perform in Meridian. Why? Because they were so moved by a small southern city taking the arts and embracing them in such a way. And part of the entertainment is that every artist has to perform a matinee for the school children of Meridian, Mississippi. So you're bringing world-class art to a people who, many of whom don't travel wide enough to experience it. Next slide. And you see the other results. This is the Mississippi Art and Entertainment Center. It's located adjacent to the Transportation Center, telling the story of artistic genius of Mississippians throughout the decades. Next slide. And with that, you see people begin to live downtown. Next. Next. And you see apartments and condominiums. And next. This particular building, the Rosenbaum building, the top floor, unfinished space sold for $500,000 per apartment. And that's in downtown Meridian, Mississippi. No one ever thought that would be possible. Next slide. But you also have market rate apartments and condominiums in the downtown. And when you bring that kind of life back into the downtown, you get your art galleries, more restaurants open up, men's and women's clothing stores, because all of a sudden Meridian is not just the place you stop on the interstate highway of 20 and 59 to buy a tank of gas or a hamburger, or perhaps even stay the night in a chain hotel out on the highway. Next slide. It becomes a place that, next slide. It becomes a place that you will need more than one weekend to enjoy all that's happening in Meridian. This is the 3-foot hotel. It's a 15-story Art Deco hotel. The original owners were the Dreyfus family, but they anglicized their name from Dreyfus to 3-foot, a literal interpretation of Dreyfus. And it is now a lovely boutique, a Marriott hotel. Really a wonderful experience there. But what has happened is Meridian has gone from that place you bypass on the interstate to a destination. And that's what investing right in passenger rail can do to your hometown. Thank you.
Thank you, John Robert. Can you stick around for the hour to answer questions at the end of the session? Is that possible?
Of course. Of course.
Okay, great. Well, staying with our theme of, I'm going to go out a little bit out of order here because I'm worried about the internet connection. So Jerem Wagner is the mayor of Caldwell, Idaho, and I talked earlier about this fast-growing Spokane, Sandpoint corridor. Well, down in Idaho, the 60-mile Treasure Valley corridor with Boise at the center is also growing very fast, as is Caldwell. The mayor formerly served in the Idaho State Legislature. He's an Arizona State graduate. Go Sun Devils. I think they're actually doing pretty well this year. And he's from, I understand, Mayor, you were born in Rexburg, Idaho, which I had the opportunity to spend a couple of days during the eclipse a few years ago. It's a delightful community. And you're going to talk about the importance of rail to Caldwell. Some of your colleagues are here. Elaine and Brave from the city of Valley Regional Transit and the city of Boise will be speaking later. But we're really happy that you're able to join us and share your perspective on rail in your community. Mayor?
Yes, thank you so much. And it's my pleasure and privilege to be here to speak to you. I wish that I could be there as well in person. I was actually in Moscow, Idaho last week for a planning conference, and I'm leaving for DC on Thursday. So it's kind of tough to get another few days away, but I'm just grateful to be able to join you via Zoom today. And I really appreciate John's remarks and what he shared as well. So before I do get into kind of our Treasure Valley, it was neat to see those pictures. And I think it's great because it just reminds us of how similar we all are, whether we're in Spokane, Washington, Caldwell, Idaho, or whether we're in Meridian, Mississippi, and some of those other towns. I could relate to each and every one of those pictures as John showed them. That beautiful little town in Missouri. It was almost like I was looking at my downtown and our train depot here in Caldwell. It was very, very similar. And then seeing some of those pictures of Meridian, Mississippi and their downtown and the buildings, again, is just almost like I was looking down our main street here in Caldwell. So I think that's an important thing for us to remember, that as we plan and want to do these things, that it is the struggles we may be having, the challenges, it's not unique just to us. There's other communities throughout this country that are experiencing those same challenges. And we need to use each other and relate to each other and reach out and see, okay, how did you overcome this hurdle and how did you overcome that? And I think together we can create and magnificent things and bring rail really back to where it needs to be. I think we're kind of in between that Missouri and Meridian. We don't have the rail yet, but we've had really just a blossoming of our downtown revitalization that really was unheard of, 10, 20 years ago. So a little bit about Caldwell. So as you mentioned, the Treasure Valley. Treasure Valley encompasses the four largest cities in the state of Idaho, and we all fall right in line from Caldwell on the outskirts, and then Nampa, Meridian, and then into Boise, which Boise is the capital and the biggest city here in Idaho. So Caldwell has a population of around 75,000 people to date. And we've seen incredible growth, just like I think many of the towns across the West. And so the big part has just been trying to keep up with that growth. And we really feel that one of those catalysts is going to be that passenger rail coming back through the Treasure Valley. Used to come through here several years ago, 1997. The Pioneer Line did come through the Treasure Valley and had stops in Boise on its way further to the east. And so we've been really working hard at getting that back. And that's kind of the first focus right now, is getting that line back from Boise to Salt Lake City, getting that connection. And then obviously after that, we really want to go Boise all the way up to, Seattle, Portland, and connect all of those towns and communities coming through Caldwell. Our goal is we'd love to get our train depot functioning again. It's a beautiful, been restored. So it's ready to go. Just throw a ticket person in there and you got the rail coming in, and we're ready and set to do that. So a lot of things though that still need to fall in place. We've been working. I really appreciated also John's comments about really working together, collecting all those other mayors when he was a former mayor, because those voices are important and they can be heard. And as he said, he did make a difference. That one voice joined with those others can really truly make a difference at the federal level. And we've been able to do that here in Idaho, sit with myself, the other mayors, Mayor McLean in Boise, and many others throughout where this line will be, have been able to join forces, sending letters, applying for grants, different things like that, showing a united front. So I think that's really important for communities that are looking to, whether it's bring rail back, try to get it for the first time. What are those things you can do? Is join and unite as one force together rather than several separate voices. What I see, my background, I'm a planner by trade. I'm an AICP certified planner. I did that for 15 plus years as a county planner, transportation planner. Was actually the city planner of Caldwell for several years before I became mayor. And so I kind of used that background of, what kind of influence or impact could passenger rail coming back through Caldwell and having a stop in Caldwell. Over the last 10 years, we've seen an amazing revitalization of our downtown. We constructed a beautiful plaza. We have an incredible ice skating rink down there in the wintertime that brings in, literally tens of thousands, if not well over 100,000 visitors that come into our community to see the Christmas lights. We have an amazing Christmas light display that goes along with our Winter Wonderland downtown and all of those things. And, we've recently gotten a new apartment complex that's been constructed in the downtown. And so we're wanting to get more downtown living, things of that nature. We're working on an outdoor amphitheater near our downtown. hotels that are looking to come. We do not have a hotel in our downtown, so that's a little jealous when John showed that picture of theirs on that. So we're working very hard on bringing that into our downtown, and the passenger rail goes right along with that. And again, like kind of like what John was saying, he hit so many things on the nail. I really appreciated his remarks. Is we want people to come, and they come and visit now for the day. We want them to come and stay for the weekend and then come back a few months later because they didn't get everything in that they wanted to see. And that passenger rail is a big part of that. I think some of the difficulties we've been seeing and trying to overcome is people think they hear rail and they think freight and things of that nature. And then they also think, well, now we have to build a new track. And none of those are true. And so I think a lot of that is just trying to get through the misunderstandings, misconceptions of the citizens, of some of our council members here in the city. They're worried about the ongoing costs. They're like, yeah, grant money's great, but now we're going to have to continue to feed and pay for this. And it's like, no, not really. If we can get this going and Amtrak can run this, that's not how this works. And so I think a lot of that is just education on that. But I could see as far as we've come the last 10 years with new businesses, new shops, great restaurants. One of our downtown restaurants was listed in a national publication as one of the best Mexican restaurants in the country. And so as we have those things growing, that next step really is if we could get that passenger rail. And then again, we just have those visitors now coming on a more regular basis, staying for 2 or 3 nights, visiting the hotels, obviously the restaurants, the shops, bringing those in. It's just a huge catalyst for what we could do and see. So I think we positioned ourselves extremely well. And now it's just kind of that waiting game. And I tell people, look, it's going to take time. We can't just be a flash in the pan. We got to show our commitment, continuing to work towards what we want to accomplish and not just give it our all at the beginning and then back off. We got to continue working, knowing this is going to be several years in the making to get this to come back. But we need to be that resounding voice, continuing to knock on the door, of our U.S. senators or U.S. representatives, that, this is important to us. And these are the reasons why. And this is the benefit. And I think also, I was super excited when Salt Lake City got awarded the Olympics again. The mayor there is a huge champion of this as well, a great lady. So we've talked on this a few times. I know Mayor McLean has had many discussions with her, and that just opens that up. Okay, now we got the Olympics there. Wouldn't it be great for people in the Treasure Valley to jump on the train and head down to Salt Lake to go and watch the Olympics? And even from Portland or Seattle and all those towns in between. How many cars would that eliminate having to drive down I-84 to get to Salt Lake and get into that congestion down there? So that's been a big catalyst as well. And we plan and hope to really work on that as well and use that as a driver to get this back and going for the Treasure Valley. And it'll help and bless really all those communities from Portland, Seattle, down through Caldwell, through Boise, all the way over to Salt Lake City. And we'll all see a big revitalization, I think, of our downtowns as part of that process.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you can you stick around for the rest of the hour to answer questions? Is that possible?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. And thank you for referencing the importance of events in terms of rail development. Back in 2009, when Vancouver hosted the Winter Games, Governor Gregoire, WashDOT, Amtrak worked with the BC government, and we were able to get the second train, which went north, Amtrak Cascades from Seattle to Bellingham and stopped at Bellingham. We got improvements made with BNSF and the province of BC that allowed BNSF to have that second Amtrak train go up to Vancouver for the Olympics, and it stayed there. Now we're looking at co-hosting between Seattle and Vancouver the FIFA World Cup in 2026, which is a much bigger event than the Olympics and much more challenging from a travel perspective because you have people going to events in Seattle and Vancouver, whereas during the Olympics, everybody's just going one way up to Vancouver. So the opportunity to add train service for the FIFA World Cup is important. And I think the point you made about the Olympics coming to Salt Lake is a big deal because I've been very impressed with the Bring Back Rail campaign that Boise's put together and you've been very much a part of. I think that kind of focus and attention on major events helps as a catalyst to get those investments in the rail corridor. I also appreciate your acknowledgement to your colleagues that this is the Old Pioneer is part of the Amtrak long distance service. So there's no state subsidy required for operating, which is a very, very important. and a recognition that this is the main line for Union Pacific. There's actually a lot of rail activity in that Nampa, Boise, Caldwell area. There's opportunities for co-investment. And I had a chance to visit with Elaine Clegg, your train station there, and it's really remarkable, and the opportunity to do in Caldwell what John Robert Smith did in Meridian is really impressive. We're going to turn over now to going back locally. Lois Bolenbeck is the Executive Director of the Spokane Regional Transportation Council. And what's interesting looking at her background is that she has had 20 years in transportation planning and transit management. So particularly appropriate to look at the connection between intercity rail and regional transportation systems. She also has had some background with the U.S. Air Force, served in the U.S. Air Force, and was involved in quality management at the Kennedy Space Center. So she's kind of multimodal. The ability to bring all the county and port and local officials, legislators, members of the congressional delegation together is a really important part of the Regional Transportation Council, and we appreciate you being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. No?
Hold it really close.
Yeah, no, it's not on.
Let's see. Test you. Yeah, you got almost put it in your mouth.
All right. This is a
That's
public
ridiculous.
health issue, I think. Can you all hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I want to set my timer because it's very easy for me to go over 5 minutes. That was 30 minutes, so we won't be doing that. You can just wave at me, Tom. All right, so I am the Executive Director of the Spokane Regional Transportation Council. That is the MPO and RTPO that serves Spokane. I think you've heard a little bit already this morning about the transload facility that is put in place here, Bridging the Valley, which is our grade separation series of projects in this area to help support freight. And what I want to go ahead and do is spend a little time talking about some projects actually that I got to work on when I was still in Florida that have to do with passenger rail. And the first one is Sunrail, and that was a commuter rail service that we put in place in Central Florida, primarily to deal with congestion along the I-4 corridor. And I-4 runs diagonally from the east coast of Florida and Daytona Beach through Orlando to Tampa, and they're having a time of it right now, of course, getting ready for a storm that's coming in. With tourist attractions and commuters from the surrounding areas, I-4 is extremely congested. And you can imagine, everybody knows Disney, Universal, people are coming from not just around the country, but around the world to the Orlando area. On a peak day, the airport gets about 100,000 passengers into the Orlando airport. So there's that sort of pressure on I-4, but in the county that I worked in and lived in, Volusia County, which is the Daytona area, we had 40,000 people commuting every day into Orlando for work. So that's up to about 50,000 currently. So again, you can imagine there was pressure. So the answer to that was to put in a commuter rail service. And the service spans 61 miles. In order to make it work well, they bought the track and moved most of the freight rail over to the west side of the state out of the core urbanized area. And there's 17 stations, and I would tell you each of these stations has a pretty amazing development story that is associated with it. Whether it is a smaller city that is reorienting their downtown and creating transit-oriented development, or if you go to the west, where you see the Tupperware station, well, we all know Tupperware, right? They manufacture containers. They owned 1,300 acres around the station, And they said, we're not land developers, but it seems like there's a better use. And so they created a transit-oriented development specifically to connect and serve the station. Further up, Advent Health, they were doing were developing what they called a health village. And so Advent Health worked very closely with the rail operation to put infrastructure in. The health system itself paid for sidewalks and crossing arms and landscaping to create shade, and providing shuttles in the local area to make sure that people could access this Sunrail station, not only their customers, but their employees as well. So they saw that as an opportunity to extend the reach that they would have for attracting good employment. So the numbers vary depending on studies that you look at, but the expansion of Sunrail has led to over $1.8 billion in new development just associated with the rail stations. Leading up to COVID, they were carrying about 1.5 million passengers. That dropped down, of course, but in 23 and 24, they're back up to over 1 million passengers a day. So the second project I want to talk about is not a commuter rail project, but it is the Brightline project. And that was really started, there were two initiatives going on in the state of Florida. One was Amtrak was looking at their next best opportunity to provide or expand service. And they were looking nationally, and the east coast of Florida was at the top of their list. So we were talking about restoring Amtrak along the east coast of Florida, doing a lot of planning. Right around the same time, there was a high-speed rail initiative in Florida. And so there was a lot of analysis going on with how we could implement high-speed rail. Well, neither of those two things advanced. But Florida East Coast Railway, FEC, looked at the analyses and the studies and the groundwork and said, we can do this. So they owned the track along the east coast of Florida. They created a subsidiary called Brightline, and they implemented the first passenger rail service privately owned in this country in a century. So just last year, they extended service from, it started from Miami to Palm Beach, and then they extended service up to the Orlando area. At the Orlando International Airport, when they created a third hub, they created 4 transit bays, in part for commuter rail, which doesn't currently go there, but they're planning it, and the other is for Brightline. So Brightline goes right into the Orlando International Airport. This is a lot, and I think what you heard from the last speaker is valid. It takes a lot of work. This is not easy. Neither of these projects just happened. It came with a lot of work. It came with project champions and partnerships between the public sector and the private sector. Negotiating the purchase of rail lines, moving freight, coordinating transit so that when people get to their endpoints, they can get around town. Collaboration is important. Flexibility is important. Neither of these projects started out as what they ended up. Perseverance is important. And so if you are looking at, and obviously everybody's here because you are advocates, you have to stick with it. You have to just keep beating that drum year over year, and day over day.
Well, that was very interesting. I'm so glad you brought up Bright Rail, and they're also expanding out to the west. They're operating high-speed rail, or will be, from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And one of the essences of high-performance rail is how do you marry private capital investment with public infrastructure? And just the idea of having higher speed intercity rail actually go to an airport in America which happens in Asia and Europe and the rest of the planet, except here, is remarkable.
And I think it's probably important to mention, they logged 2 million trips last year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a remarkable story. If you ever have a chance, I've been on Brightline. It's a beautiful train and a beautiful station, and they own the real estate, which is very helpful. But that is that's one of the fastest growing parts of the country, and they're really a remarkable story. So thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for bringing your experience and expertise to Spokane. I think it's going to be good to work with you. Okay, Montana is in the house. Denley Logie is a state representative, we hope soon to be senator, from District 45, which when you drive on I-90 or take Amtrak, I believe your district starts in the Idaho border, goes almost to Missoula, and St. Regis is kind of the centerpiece of your district. And Denley is joined by George Bailey, our good friend and one of our partners at the Regional Infrastructure Accelerator. George is in the process as a citizen, which is remarkable to me, developing a solar, hydrogen, and charging facility at St. Regis. And if you've ever been on I-90, you know there's a big truck stop and restaurants. It's kind of a gathering place for the region and for folks traveling, truckers and folks traveling on I-90. And they're going to talk about their project at St. Regis and how hydrogen, which has great opportunities for fueling long distance trucks and potentially railroad locomotives. They're going to both talk about how they're working together to advance this, both in terms of for trucking and for rail and for local uses, which is very important. I hope you also talk about the Bunker Hill Mine project, which is a remarkable repurposing of an old mine to bring in critical minerals to help the clean energy transition, and the ability to reopen that mine for a good purpose and then transmit that material to a smelter in British Columbia, Trail BC, I think it's 395, is a great project. PACCAR's involved, and it shows the opportunities for finding customers for clean energy. Denley, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. Thank you. I'm Denley Logie. I live at St. Regis, and what it's really known for are the antique shops and Huckleberry Shakes. And it's the north route to Glacier Park. But I'll give you a little bit from the legislative standpoint, being a Montana legislator. When it comes to the passenger rail service, the Montana legislature has not really supported that, and the reason being, they have enough roads to take care of and don't have the money that they want to put out any money. It's not that they're totally against it, but in Montana we have lumber, we have coal, we have grain, and everybody worries about the freight on the rail, because that is part of everybody's livelihood, is that freight that goes on the rail. And so part of the discussion comes into, are we gonna have to give up some of that freight to get passenger rail? Now, I rode the passenger train in 1968 when I was in college. I went back to North Dakota on this other route. It's a great route. It was great transportation. But like I say, as Montanans, they've been skeptical about whether they would lose some of that rail service for their freight lines, and so they're not willing to give that up. And we had bills that came through trying to promote some passenger rail, and as chairman of the Transportation Committee in the House, and then also being on the Interim Transportation Committee, we've sent those back to the local level, and part of the reason was saying Montana isn't willing to step up and put in the money, but the locals are the ones that are going to really gain, and I think that is what actually has made it pretty successful in Montana, because the local communities, thanks to Commissioner Strohmeyer and many others that have put the work in and gotten the locals involved in all of those towns. And we are a tourist state for sure. We have Yellowstone Park, and that would bring the people into that part of the state. We have Glacier Park right now. The rail service stops at Whitefish. and tourism, we can really benefit, but when it gets into people are talking about local service and medical appointments, I think that part of the discussion has to be, having a little bit of a commuter service, and I think you have to start talking about buses as well. When you're in a rural state like Montana and other parts like in Washington, connect that bus service to the rail service. Don't be just talking rail service, passenger rail. You have to make that connection to get people, if we have a population that isn't driving, you gotta get them there somehow with a shuttle. And like in Montana, maybe a 50-mile or 100-mile bus ride to get them to that train. But I think that has to be right in that conversation, because you can't just talk the passenger rail. You can figure people will get to the depot that they need to go to, but incorporate it, because if you're asking for money from the feds, and that's where the money's gonna come, it's the feds, it's gonna hard to peel money out of state budgets a lot of times, especially, like I say, in our state. But and now I'll turn it over to George, because one of the things being in the legislature, the EV vehicles were coming, and I started legislation 8 years ago, trying to incorporate the EV, so they were paying for some of the road use, but also to try and get charging stations in, and it's taken that long, and people when I started talking, they were saying, what are you talking about? Well, now it's here. I brought up the hydrogen this last session. I brought a bill so we can incorporate the distribution of hydrogen around the state. So you have to look forward, and that's what the rail service is doing, is the passenger rail service is looking forward. So it takes a while to work on some of these things, and what we're doing in St. Regis, that's a plan for, well, at least the west end of Montana, to try and incorporate the hydrogen into transportation, whether it's the trucks, trains, and also generating power for those EV stations. So I'll turn it over to George right now.
Thank you. I feel very privileged to be speaking to you today, and the two mayors of Caldwell and Meridian. I'm the chairman of the St. Regis Resort District. We're a town of 400 people, and we have a small 3% sales tax. There's about 12 communities. So I guess I'm the closest thing to a mayor in St. Regis you're gonna find. But some of the things our Justice 40 community is trying to achieve is similar to what the larger is. We just really feel like we have become a voice for rural frontier America. We can't leave out these little tiny towns, and St. Regis is gonna make sure we don't. The second part is I'd like to thank the RIA team. If you don't get enough of them today and tomorrow, you're sure welcome to meet at noon on Thursday at the St. Regis Community Center. The team's gonna be there, and we're gonna start some of our planning efforts. So St. Regis, as Denley said, is not only on I-90, and we estimate that 2.5 million people turn off of I-90 and turn at St. Regis on 135 and go up to Glacier National Park. And so we already have a lot of people buying milkshakes. We're a very well-funded resort district, and we like to work with other partners like Missoula and Spokane. How do we make all this stuff happen? One of the things that we're looking at is if you look at the high performance rail map, you'll see the word St. Regis on there, and you'll also see Paradise. So like Denley said, I'm also a member of the team for the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. If for some reason we need to not go through St. Regis and we need to go kind of the Highway 200 route, it really is smart for us to start thinking about not only how we might get a bus to that place, but I'm really interested in commuter rail. There's some really cool things that are happening. California, we had that conference And then it was the type of thing where Dave had in Missoula, and we had folks from Stadler and then Elstrom, I think it is, and both of them are providing commuter rail. So then getting to the hydrogen. Little St. Regis, Montana, George Bailey is the vice chair of the project advisory committee for this Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. And I used to be a university research administrator, and I never thought that I would say that I was part of a $1 billion corporation, but that's what we are. The Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub, made up of Oregon and Washington and Montana. We're doing work in Idaho, I'll talk about just in a second. But we're going to decarbonize transportation in the Pacific Northwest. And it's not just gonna be, the class 8, 18-wheelers. It's gonna be light rail or commuter rail, and it's also gonna be freight and passenger rail. So my dearest friend, the guy I try to keep up with, if I'm an Energizer bunny, Dave is like a super bunny. If you ever wanna watch somebody and get tired, just follow him around for a day. But he came up with this concept of how do we connect Seattle to Chicago, because that's, the rail service, but could we establish a hydrogen corridor between Seattle and Chicago, and probably over time beyond? And the answer is yes. We are working on that right now. We're working with the Heartland Hydrogen Hub, and then the Midwest, which is Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. There's another $1 billion sitting on the table from a thing called the Hydrogen Demand Initiative. So we're wanting to make this corridor from Seattle to Chicago, a model of how we can do it. And we can have little towns in Webo, Montana. We can have little towns like Three Forks, Montana. We can have little towns like Big Timber, Montana, and even larger towns like Bozeman and Livingston and Belgrade, Missoula, all connected. And so if anybody's looking for hydrogen, hopefully in the Spokane Valley, for your buses and some of your other transportation, we would love to talk to you, because we have a $1 billion corporation that's been funded by the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration that wants to not only get more hydrogen produced, but thanks to RIA, they want it to be able to be distributed to the smallest places along the way. And so, again, thank you, David, for all that you do, but also coming up with that concept, because I think we can make Missoula an epicenter for the decarbonization of not only 18-wheelers or Class A trucks, but also air transportation and also rail. And so with that, I'd just like to say that if we don't have meetings like this, we can't move this forward. The legislature right now hasn't taken a really proactive on passenger rail. But I think that's gonna change primarily because all the hard work of the Big Sky Passenger Rail, we have Republican and Democratic county commissioners and city leaders, mayors and stuff, all the way along the route. So we've got to keep grinding, and meetings like this are what make us go to the next level. Thank you.
So I want to bring back our two mayors into the conversation with a point that Denley made with regard to interference with freight operations. And John Robert Smith in particular, the 2 points that Denley made with regard to not interfering with freight operations, because it's so important to Montana economy as it is for communities in the South. But also the point about getting people to the train station with a robust transit and intercity coach system. I would just note, and Kirk is here from WashDOT. There was, before all this BIL money, there was high-speed rail money in the Obama administration. And our Cascades corridor was successful in getting $800 million. And it did a lot of things. It provided passing tracks. It provided protection against landslides because some of the BNSF line goes along Puget Sound. It was prone to landslides. And in the end of that capital investment program in 2009, 2010, BNSF will tell you that those joint investments by them and by the federal government resulted in additional freight capacity for the BNSF and UP lines between Seattle and Portland. It was a big deal. And as you look at, in fact, Montana was a leader in the old Great Northern Corridor, which looked at things to decongest the corridor. And there have been a lot of investments by BNSF in particular. The Sandpoint Junction connector in Idaho, which double tracks the tracks going across Lake Pend Oreille, big deal. Eliminated bottlenecks for both Amtrak and more importantly for their trains. Fixing up snow sheds, maintaining snow sheds so that they don't cause problems. Doing the grade separation projects, so the liability in busy towns for railroads going through limited. On the intercity bus connection, I think the state of Oregon deserves a lot of credit for their intricate bus networking system that connects almost all of Oregon to the Coast Starlight. Kudos to them. But I wanted to, and we're going to hear from Elaine and Treasure Valley about how they're going to connect intercity rail with regional transit. But John Robert, your perspective on dealing with freight railroads and with connectivity to Meridian.
Sure, thank you. And as far as connectivity to Meridian, Canadian Pacific, as you know, merged with Kansas City Southern. Now they're CPKC. And when Kansas City Southern was in the driver's seat on the Meridian to Dallas-Fort Worth, which they called their Speedway, greatly improved, they wanted no conversation about passenger rail. But as a part of the merger, STB, Service Transportation Board, that you'll hear from later, specifically asked Canadian Pacific, will you commit to run passenger rail from Meridian to Dallas-Fort Worth, which we almost did when I was chairman of the board of Amtrak. And CP committed to that. And CP's approach is this can be good for freight and passenger rail is another customer for us. So that's a very healthy way of looking at passenger rail. They've also made the same commitment to run from New Orleans to Baton Rouge in Louisiana. So not only a willing, but a committed freight is huge. Now along the Gulf, that was different. And we must find a way for the freights to see a positive impact as well as for passenger rail. So when we started on the Gulf, and this was led by Federal Railroad Administration, of which we were a part of this ongoing discussion. The discussion was caused by Senator Wicker, who created what was called the Gulf Coast Working Group to study restoration of service across the Gulf of Mississippi, which had been lost during Hurricane Katrina. The infrastructure was rebuilt in something like 6 months, but passenger rail service had not been restarted, partly because Amtrak didn't want to restart that long distance service, but partly due to the freights. So when we started that discussion, CSX wanted 2.3 billion, that's with a B, billion in infrastructure. And as I said at the time, we spent 2.4 billion going to Mars. Yeah, I'm just going across the Mobile. But through a long process, and honestly, there was a leadership shift at CSX to look at the federal law says Amtrak has access to our infrastructure. The federal law says we have to give priority to passenger rail. So how can we make this work for both of us? And the STB was a critical player in bringing both Amtrak, the two freights, CSX, Norfolk Southern, and the Port of Mobile to a point of a pressured, if you will, settlement. And that settlement is investing $240 million in the infrastructure of both Norfolk Southern, CSX, and some in the Port of Mobile. So there were three winners there, but also the winner of passenger rail along the Gulf. And I think, and I'll mention this again in the next session 4, Marty Oberman, chair of Surface Transportation Board, said, in thinking about this, I realized that the aggrieved party was not Amtrak, nor either freight, nor the port. The aggrieved party were the people of the Gulf who had been deprived of this passenger rail connectivity for 17 years. So the comment was made, you have to stay with it. Well, staying with it has an entirely different meaning when you think about a 17-year process of constantly pushing. But we look to start that service in the first quarter of 2025. The moral to all of that is we found a point where it works very much to the advantage of the freight. That $240 million is spending their right of way. But it also allows the connectivity to connect two of the largest tourist cities, certainly with New Orleans, the largest in the country as far as tourism draw, and then Mobile's share. But all of those cities across the Mississippi Gulf, one county alone in Mississippi will experience a $90 million a year increase in revenue because of 2 trains a day with every station getting 4 stops. That's a huge impact for city governments and county governments there. So you find the win-win, and just to know how much your local voices mean, after we got the attention of Trent Lott and others who weighed in with Amtrak, Amtrak put up a banner in their headquarters, which it was Union Station at the time, and it said, "It's Meridian, stupid." That simply means you're not going to find the mayor of Chicago or the mayor of New York or the mayor of Los Angeles walking the halls of Congress in support of and trying to make a positive impact on passenger rail. But you will find the mayor of Whitefish, Montana there. You will find mayors in Maine and New Mexico and obviously in Mississippi. So it's those also know that Congress is rural dominant. So those smaller town voices have a disproportionate impact on decisions that are made on Capitol Hill. And the one thing we have to remember, we're more than advocates. We're not just voices crying in the wilderness. We see this as the future and as economic development. And when you make your case on the economic development return to cities and towns and counties and states in your region, that will sell to Republicans and Democrats alike. So we cannot be parochial. Certainly you're interested in the trains in the Northwest, but you are part of that much larger debate of, are we going to have trains in the United States that actually function and serve our people? So resist the lure to become only interested in your train. You must solve a national issue.
That's great. Sharon, did you want to comment about connecting potential intercity rail with folks in your community?
Yeah. So say that one more time. It cut out on it, Bruce, if you don't mind.
Dinley brought up the point about making sure that there's a transit and intercity bus connection for folks that don't drive to the main passenger rail line, which would be at your train station in your community?
Yeah, so we've been working. I'm currently the chair of VRT that Elaine leads, and so we've been working hand in hand and trying to see what we can do. And looking at all options. I think that's important as well. As our world, our communities continue to evolve, we need to evolve along with them. So looking at the typical buses compared to like your microbuses and other things of that nature. What's the easiest way to get some of these people around into the connections in there? We have a pretty condensed downtown, which is great for us. So it's easy to kind of walk and get to those different areas within a short distance of the train station in our downtown. And then also, connecting these other areas. So we tried really hard. We thought we had one to get a dedicated route in Caldwell. Unfortunately, the last minute got taken away from us. So we're hoping to bring that back again next budget sessions with our council, and just starting those small steps, getting some dedicated routes going up and down what would be our boulevard, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump from the train station. Connecting. We got a great liberal arts college here in Caldwell to other commercial entities, commercial centers that we could get that bus line back. So that's for us to just taking those baby steps, getting that dedicated route back. And obviously it would help for the passenger rail, but just for the citizens right now. And then as we get into that passenger rail, trying to add on to that.
Great. Well, we are at time. For those of you who have questions either in person here or via Zoom, we're gonna go a 10-minute break now so you can speak to the panelists here. For our two mayors, we will submit the questions to you, and we will be the conduit to get the answers back from our two remote speakers to folks remote or in person. So we're gonna take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back. And when we come back, we're gonna actually dig deeper into these corridors. We're gonna talk about Big Sky, we're gonna talk about the Pioneer, the Cascades, FRA, Amtrak. It's gonna be a good session. So 10 minutes. Thank you.